Welcome everyone, and thank you for joining today's webinar Beyond Jira Workflow. My name is Florian Bauer and I'm responsible for the product management at Flower BPM. Let's jump right in. I want to start with something you already know very well, a Jira issue. Here we have a task to design a flyer, a typical work item routed to the right team member. There is a summary, a description, and in this case, it's already assigned. As you know, once you begin working on an issue, you move it through its workflow states. And when the work is finished, you set the ticket to resolved or done. Which steps you must take and how many is defined in your Jira workflow. And this is how it looks like. For our flyer design example, we begin in to do, then move to concept, then design, followed by testing and finally the launch. Let's zoom out for a moment. Designing the flyer is not a standalone task. It lives inside a larger end-to-end business process, in our example, the product launch process. And once you see the whole process, it becomes obvious. The flyer design is just one of many coordinated activities that all have to work together to bring a product to market. And this is where Flower BPM comes in. Flower connects your work items to the bigger business process behind them. So you don't just manage tasks, you manage the entire flow of work across teams and departments. In fact, the Jira workflow becomes just a sub-process within a broader business process. BPMN is quite the industry standard for modeling business processes. This is also the notation used by the Flower Process Modeler. Let me briefly walk you through the diagram to give you an overview. All right, we have these different boxes here, and these are the activities in our process. And the important part is the process engine turns each activity into a Jira work item at runtime, exactly at the moment the process flow reaches that step. Just we saw earlier with the flyer design task. When the process arrives at the activity, Flower automatically creates the corresponding Jira issue. Where that issue is created in Jira depends on your setup. You can define default settings at the model level, for example, which Jira project and issue type should be used in general, but you can also override these defaults for each individual activity if different teams or ticket types are involved. So, by choosing the project and the issue type, either globally or per activity, you control exactly where the ticket will be created and which team will receive the task. Activities define what needs to be done, how these activities are arranged in the process, whether sequential or parallel, defines when things happen. And the who is handled by swimlanes. In our example, the flyer design activity sits on the marketing swimlane. And here's the important part. As soon as an activity is placed on a swimlane and the swimlane has an assignee, every ticket created from that activity and from all activities in that swim lane automatically gets that assignee. And of course, it's not just marketing. In our process model, we also have product management, sales, legal, IT and engineering, all the teams that play a role in this end-to-end flow. In BPMN, you will also find elements that aren't meant for execution, but simply to document and explain a process. For some teams, that's all they need, a clear visual description. But even when a process is executed, this extra context is extremely useful. It helps everyone understand what the task is about and how it fits into a bigger flow. And that's where the combination of Jira, Flower BPM, and Confluence really shines. Because from any activity, you can link to a Confluence page to give the assignee detailed instructions, much more than you'd want to put into a Jira description, for example. And the other way around, you can embed the process diagram directly in Confluence to document things like QA guidelines or operating procedures. So with BPMN, you don't just execute processes, you also provide the context that makes them clear, consistent, and easy to follow. Then we have the gateways. This one is a parallel gateway. It simply means that several tasks can start at the same time. Normally, the process flows from one activity to the next, and as soon as a Jira work item is completed, the process engine creates the next ticket. But with a parallel gateway, it creates multiple tickets at once. Another type is the exclusive gateway or XOR decision. Here the process must choose one path. Do we move into the campaign launch or do we need another QA loop? In practice, this decision is made based on Jira fields. Of course, approvals can also be handled directly in Jira. Jira Service Management has a built-in approval feature that exactly matches that. And the real power comes from combining both worlds, the flexibility of the Jira workflow and the end-to-end orchestration of a BPMN process. These gateways, together with Jira's own workflow logic, are essential for controlling how a process runs in Jira. Well, without diving too deep into the BPMN notation, I want to highlight two more elements that matter for execution. First, the timeout event. In Jira, you already know the concept of due dates. You set a due date on a ticket and then you can create boards or filters to monitor all tasks that have passed their due date. In BPMN, you can go one step further and say what exactly should happen when a due date is exceeded. The process engine automatically sets the due date on the Jira ticket, but once the due date is reached, the engine also follows the corresponding path in the BPMN diagram. In our example, this leads to an escalation element on the product management swim lane. Last but not least, we have the events in BPMN, and among them the so-called throw events. A throw event simply means when the process reaches this point, do something outside the process. For example, you might want to call a web service or trigger a Jira automation in Jira. And you set this up right here in the properties panel. You just tell Flower what should happen, and when the process flow arrives at this event, that action is executed automatically. You can of course extend the model by adding more activities. We add task X and so on. This is how a more complete process model evolves over time. Once we are done modeling, we save the diagram. And because we are not entirely sure the model can be executed as is, we run a validation. Flower automatically tells us what's fine and where there are problems. In our case, it immediately shows us an issue with the last change we made. So I'll delete that again and validate once more, and now we are on green. We can ignore the yellow markers for now. The important part, the model is executable. Next, we want to see how this model actually behaves. So we simulate the token flow through the model. Let's start several tokens and let them flow through the diagram. This gives us a feeling for how the flow works, what the process actually does, and where potential bottlenecks might appear. After we've saved, validated, and simulated, we publish the model. That means it is now deployed to your Jira instance and can be started. To do this, we go to the overview page, the so-called repository. And here we see our model alongside many other models. We also have a template section where we provide pre-built best practice models. You can copy these templates directly and reuse them so you don't have to start from scratch every time. And here is our product launch business process. To start it, we simply hit the play button and a small pop-up appears. We confirm start and the process begins. What happens in the background is this. Jira creates a new ticket with the key, for example, FD422. This ticket represents the process instance. At the same time, the first activity in the process turns into a Jira ticket. In the process graphic, we immediately see the current state of this ticket. The nice thing is we are still in Jira. Everything you do here is stored in Jira. The model, the process instance, and all generated tasks are simply Jira work items. Which also means monitoring your process instances is as easy as using a Jira filter. Here you can see the list of process instances and we just started, along with others that I have created earlier. And again, these are all just Jira issues, so you can build filters, create boards, and work with them exactly the way you are used to. A ticket that represents a process instance looks like any other Jira issue, with one addition: our process management gadget. It shows the process diagram, status information for each activity, and direct links to all the underlying Jira tasks. Now I switched to the model we just started and open the first task. The first task, as we remember, sits on the product management swim lane and is about creating a product launch briefing. In the process graphic, we immediately see the blue outline shows where we are in the model, the first activity, and the ticket is in status to do. Now, let's say we've completed the task and we change the status. From a higher level BPM perspective, it doesn't matter how many internal statuses the Jira workflow has. The relevant question is the ticket open or is it done? Once we set the ticket to done, it is completed and we immediately see the updated status on the first activity in the process. At the same time, the process engine moves on, in our case through a parallel gateway, and creates the next activities. The tickets are now automatically in status to do. Well, and this is how the flow continues through the entire model. When I set another activity to resolved or done, the status in the diagram updates immediately and the next activity is created in turn. Step by step, the entire process instance progresses through the BPMN model. Let's have a look at swim lanes. On this demo instance, we only have one user, so he is the assignee for all swim lanes. Well, the nice thing about Jira is that you can now search across all these elements and build filters on top of them. For example, let's take the marketing swim lane. Let me click on this link. We are taken directly to a Jira filter showing all tasks that sit on a flower swim lane with the label marketing. This may become your team filter. Your team picks tasks from here, and you can again build classic Jira boards and reports on top of these tickets and work with them as usual. Every ticket also shows the context of the overall process, not just the individual task. So you don't just see design a flyer, you also see where you are in the end-to-end process. All right. In a real production setup, you will probably not start processes using the play button. The repository is primarily a tool for process owners and modelers, the people who design and maintain models. Instead, processes are started the same way Jira workflows are started, via the create button. That's what we are all familiar with. You select a project and an issue type, for example, this product launch. Of course, this issue type must be created beforehand by a Jira administrator and then mapped to the corresponding business process model. That's a simple select box in the Flower settings. Now, let's quickly create a fancy new app as an example. When I click create, Jira creates a new issue, as you would expect, with the difference that this issue now becomes a process instance, just like the one we saw earlier. So the flow is completely standard inside your Jira, but backed with a BPMN-driven process. You don't have to, but if you use Jira Service Management, you typically start tickets and processes from a form. That's also possible. You continue to work with the ticket created by the process engine in exactly the same way you are used to working in Jira. No additional training is required for your agents or end users. They just keep working the way they always have. So this was a quick look at the world beyond Jira workflows. With BPMN, we describe the end-to-end process, the activities, the teams involved, and how work flows across your organization. Jira and Flower focus on human-driven management processes. But more and more individual tasks will be handled by AI agents. And that's exactly why a clear deterministic process becomes essential. AI agents behave like a black box, and the only way to use them reliably is to embed them into a well-defined process flow. With Flower, BPMN, and Jira, you can orchestrate both human work and AI-driven steps under one unified process at the pace and depth that fits your organization. I hope you enjoyed this session and that it gave you some insight into the world beyond the standard Jira workflow. There is more than just the Jira workflow. There is an entire process world behind it. Flower BPM is an app for Jira and Confluence, whether you are on cloud or data center, available on the Atlassian marketplace, or simply ask your Atlassian consultant how to turn your Jira into a full BPM system. Thank you very much for your attention. If you have any questions now, I'll be happy to answer them.